Hey, good morning, everybody. Brian, how you doing?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Doing well, doing well. We'll just give a couple people some more time to jump in here. Still got a couple minutes, and then we'll dive right in.
Yeah, absolutely. And welcome everybody and thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, last time there was 80 plus people that joined in. I don't know if we'll have the same uh, size in the meeting today, but either way, we should be good to go.
Yeah, I'll just let the bragging rights between Michael, Chavi, and I work themselves out after we get done with the meeting today.
Yeah.
We had the larger crowd. And for those who may have been involved in the meeting last week or just in the overall organization of these two training sessions, thanks for your patience last week. Long story short, I had a poor reaction to vaccination, and although I have no regrets getting it, I wish the timing was different. Yeah. So it's just one of those things. Thanks for muting. It's just one of those things. Glad Michael was able to jump in and cover for me. It was unfortunate circumstance, but I'm glad we were able to get it handled on our end. I don't think it was much more than a blip on the radar on your end, but I do appreciate your patience and flexibility and working with that change. I knew there was a different link that was used and everything. And thanks again, William, for getting that worked out and coordinating with the team.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Not a problem.
We'll give it another minute or two. We're right at the top of the hour. We want to be respectful of everybody's time. We'll definitely leave some time for some questions toward the end. But at the same time, if you have a topical question on a tool or a feature that we're using, please feel free to unmute yourself and ask that question while we're on that topic. You can save it for the end. I don't want to discourage you from that either way. But if we're on the topic, if we're using that tool, it can be helpful to everybody while we're on that topic to ask the question at that time, since it's that topic. At that same drop of the token, if we start to diverge too far off of our outline, or if it starts to get into deeper discussion that's going to restrict our time to get through the whole outline, I may defer to the end of the meeting to talk more deeply about that topic, while those who need to move on with their day and do the next thing, whether that be a lunch break, whether that be a project or a meeting with a client, they have that freedom to do so at the end of the hour. Just being respectful of everybody's time. This is being recorded. The recording will be made available. And for those who are a part of the meeting that want to review what we've covered, or to share with those who weren't able to attend either of the two meetings and training sessions. Then we'll give it just another few seconds. Our participant list is jumping up fairly quickly. While we got some folks jumping in, I'll just do a really quick introduction. My name is Brian Tanner. I'm a senior technical specialist here at ATG. I work specifically on our civil development team, but I'm one of our specialists with Bluebeam as a product solution, something that I train at least weekly in with some of our clients, and glad to have the opportunity to work with you today. I've got 15 years of industry experience at working at civil engineering firms, but I actually started out with an architectural design background and pivoted partway through school. Okay, we're at 2 minutes after the hour. For folks that will be joining us, we'll just be respectful of all those time who have already joined us today, and the recording is going to be available. Again, just as a quick housekeeping item, it's very, very rare that a technology issue happens with Bluebeam or with Zoom. But if something were to occur, if anything happened with the stream or the live meeting, William's here with us today. Additionally, I will be able to jump right back in immediately following some unexpected disruption, but that is extremely rare. Just bear with us for 30 seconds or a minute if something came up. It is still technology. It is still the internet. We all rely on electrical power to provide these services, and who knows when an interruption may happen. Again, if you have a question throughout our time together today, feel free to ask it in the moment. I just ask that you mute yourself when you don't have a question. You may be in an office, somebody could be walk up behind you and want to start a conversation. It can be disruptive. I may mute you if it becomes a disruption and you may not be aware of you being muted. Please don't take offense to that. I'm just trying to be respectful of everybody, and it's not disrespectful to you. I just assume that you didn't realize it. It's a human error. It's a acceptable distraction that I'll just try to deal with in the moment. So I may mute you. You may have to unmute yourself to ask that question if it does become an issue. But we're all professionals here. It probably is going to be few, if at all, between that we have that kind of an issue. All right, just kind of continuing on that train as more people join us. I'm going to jump into the software here really quickly. I'm not a big fan of PowerPoint. I'm sure you're not either. We're going to go right into the software and really talk about the training topics at hand, really talk about the tools and the features. But before we jump right into the software, I do want to mention that every Tuesday morning, Michael Chave, who did the training last week, and my counterpart within the civil team, Jason Artley, have been doing a morning coffee review every Tuesday morning. If you follow ATG on social media, if you get emails from us, you're going to get more information about that. But look us up on LinkedIn, look us up on YouTube. Every Tuesday morning, it's an open forum for roughly an hour that Michael and Jason are taking your questions live. It's kind of like a live radio show where you can tune in, ask your questions, learn some more really interesting details about Bluebeam. It's not a replacement for a training session like this, but if you want to become a more proficient user of the software, or if you've run into a hurdle and you just want to ping somebody for a very specific request at a high level, that's an awesome opportunity to do so. So look out for that on Tuesday mornings. Depending on your time zone, the time will vary, but that's every Tuesday morning for the last several weeks and for the foreseeable future that we're hosting those. All right, as we jump into the software, I know most of us have our cameras off, but actually I think all of us but myself have cameras off, if you even have a camera at all. But there is a raise hand tool. There are reaction tools as part of Zoom. Give me a quick reaction, raise hand or whatever, for those who will be following along inside of Bluebeam as we go through this work. I encourage you to, if you've got Bluebeam installed on your system, but use that reactions tool at the bottom of the Zoom interface and just give me a raised hand or a reaction somewhere through there saying that you're going to follow along in the software, because we do get the most benefit. I see some thumbs up and stuff. We do get the most benefit from folks interacting while we're going through this, so you can see markups happening live and the interaction from various folks. I will say that we're talking strictly about Bluebeam Studio today. We will talk about some of the other Bluebeam features that we can use inside of Studio, but it will be a live session. Like anything else that we do professionally, we want to be professional in the chat window and things of that nature that we do inside of Bluebeam, and specifically in Studio. But some of the tools that we will talk about today are only available from the 2017 version forward of Bluebeam itself. I'll be working on Bluebeam 20 Extreme Edition, but as long as you have a paid version of Bluebeam, which I believe most of you have, last I remember, you're all on Bluebeam 19 transitioning forward. So I believe all these tools are available to you unless somebody is the exception to the rule and has a much older version of the software. So keeping that in mind, I wanted to just put out that one caveat. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen now and jump right into Bluebeam. Now, whenever we get into here, and I apologize in advance if I glance off to the side every once in a while, I've got everybody's information off to the right. I've also got the chat window off to the right. I encourage you to just unmute yourself and ask a question, as long as we're not all jumping in at once. But I do glance off to the right occasionally to check if somebody threw something in the chat window that maybe you didn't want to unmute yourself, you just wanted to provide something in the chat. And thank you for that, Samir. We've got transitioning Bluebeam 2020 right now. Thanks for that message to everybody. And that's why I glance off to the right, because occasionally there's a chat item in there. Feel free to use that throughout the period of time. If you don't feel like interrupting, if you just want to log a question, I'll use that chat window to kind of summarize some questions at the end of the meeting, but occasionally I'll glance over if something is very topical and in the moment. Okay, so thanks for those who will be following along inside of Bluebeam. We'll walk you through the steps of how to join into the studio session, and we'll talk about all the tools that we have available to us in there, and all the controls we have as from an administration standpoint, because some of us may be the administrator or the host of a Bluebeam session, a studio session, and some of us may just be a participant. So we have to know the level of controls and the level of participation that we have available to us. If you don't see Bluebeam Studio, if you're not in Bluebeam currently, then what two things are really coming into play here that we have to keep in mind. One is our profiles are an extremely important aspect of working inside of Bluebeam. The tools that we have available to us, the tool sets, the icons that are available in our interface are all reliant on what profile that we have loaded. So under the review dropdown, you're going to see that I'm using the review advanced profile currently. Now, I believe, and I think I can confirm that ESD has its own profile that everybody has access to. It's going to load the correct tools. It's going to show the correct icons. And you're also going to have commonly used markup tools within your tool chest as part of that profile. Whatever the case may be, depending on the profile we have loaded, we're going to have a set number and type of icons available to us in interface. Bluebeam Studio is one of those. It's the icon that's really kind of indicated by a studio apartment type of icon. I don't know exactly if that's true, if that's what the icon represents, but that's how I describe it. If you don't see that icon, you either need to change your profile to higher level or at advanced mode or something along those lines. Perhaps you are in the viewer only mode after a 30-day trial. And I say that not because of your lack of licensing, you all have the licensing available to you. But I say that because you may be working with clients who access Bluebeam Studio through a temporary version of Bluebeam Studio and Bluebeam Review that reverts to a view only mode after 30 days, and they can still participate. They don't have to pay for Bluebeam to participate in a studio session. They can revert to the view mode, the free version of the software after 30 days, and they can still participate in the studio sessions that you've created and administrated and they're a part of, that they've been invited to. So I wanted to put out that caveat as well. Participating in a studio session is not dependent on a paid license, but creating, administrating, and owning a studio session does require a paid version of Bluebeam. So I'm in Bluebeam Review Advanced. I see that icon. If I don't, we can right click and we can see the show options of which other tools are available to us that are either shown or currently not shown. We can obviously see the toggle of what's blue and highlighted or not on what's shown. Again, either on the left side or the right side panel of my interface. Bluebeam was already open for me and available, so we see that I'm in there. I also, as part of training, always sign myself out. It may seem kind of a tiny detail, but signing into Bluebeam Studio is a part of the process. It's part of the training because it is a part of your experience of using the software. So if I sign in, I'm going to get a sign into Studio account. Now, if you don't already have a Studio account, note that whenever you have Bluebeam Review installed on your desktop, you don't need an account. It's just a license that you use for the software on your computer, whether it be a network license or a standalone license. You don't have to have a Bluebeam account to use Bluebeam on your machine. But to use Bluebeam Studio, we do have to have an account. If you don't have one already, it's going to be based off of your organizations, your work email address. So name, last name, your display name. I ask that that be something professional. I want to say Michael likes to use the example of we don't have Batman working at ESD, so don't use Batman. My kind of moniker that I've used on Twitter for a number of years is Indie Drafter. While that may not be something funny or humorous or unprofessional, it's also not letting people know who I am. And if we're looking at the markups, we're pulling reports out of the Bluebeam Studio session, not everybody's going to know who Indie Drafter is or whatever your nickname is. So please use something professional there. You may have an ESD standard for what's expected. out of your display name. Maybe it's your first name and last initial, first initial, last name, or just for your first and last name in conjunction with each other as part of the display name. Email, password, confirm password, create the account. You will get an email saying to confirm your account. Yes, you should do that at some point, but your first participation inside of Bluebeam Studio does not require you to confirm your account. So for those who are following along, who plan to participate as part of the studio session that I'm going to create here briefly, if you don't have an account already, go ahead and create that. Just make it your first name, last name, your work email, password. Make sure you pay attention to the type of requirements for your password for security purposes, and make sure it's something that you can remember. Yes, we can reset passwords just like any other account, but it is something to keep in mind. Now, this is a part of the process that not only do we need to know internally, but we need to know for the clients that we work with when we collaborate with them. If it's their first time using Bluebeam Studio and collaborating on a markup session, they will have to create an account as well. Again, they don't have to have a paid version of Bluebeam to access Bluebeam Studio. They will get that free 30-day trial whenever they first get invited, and they can install the software. There's even a web-based version of the software where they have some limited controls to access the files that are uploaded to Studio, and that they can interact with the markup. But at the very least, they have to either interact with that limited version of tools online, or install the free version or the 30-day trial of Bluebeam, and then create the account. That's the minimum access to entry for them to participate in a Bluebeam session. So I already have an account. I'm going to go to sign in. Again, that's my work email. It should be your work email as well. I'm going to go to next and log in. And I never do the keep me signed in for training purposes, but I encourage you, if you're using Bluebeam regularly, if you're using Studio regularly, it would behoove you to go ahead and check this box to automatically sign in every time you access Bluebeam and jump into Studio. Just makes your life a little bit easier, saves you a few picks and clicks, and makes you a more efficient employee. All right, so we've got some existing Studio sessions, and I'm going to talk about those just very briefly. But I don't want anybody to jump into any of these. I'm going to create a new session for us to all participate in today. We do have two different modes of Bluebeam Studio. We have Studio Sessions, which is kind of indicated by this blackboard or whiteboard type of icon that we're used to from our classrooms. And then we have Bluebeam Studio Projects. And projects, just as a very quick reference to that, you'll see that the list of projects is different than the list of sessions. Projects is a location for us to open and store files in the cloud. It can be a separate document solution to other cloud storage and file management solutions. Do I expect you to put your design files in here that you're working off of in an AutoCAD or MicroStation-based product? No. This is not a replacement for your server necessarily. This is for collaboration purposes still, for these projects to be set up. We're not training on projects today. That could be a completely separate topic and well worth an hour of your time as well. We're training on sessions, but I did want to draw your attention that there is a difference between projects, the file management and storage and sharing options within there, versus Studio Sessions, which is our shared markup experience. Okay, so we're in Studio Sessions. We have some existing ones. I'm just going to briefly jump into one for you to see what it looks like. We're loading some of the documents that are already in there. We see a record of who's joined and left the session, who's created markups, and when they created those markups, and the order that all those actions were taken within. For those that have been using Bluebeam for some time, they know that we have stored markups inside the PDF. That's one of the biggest selling points of Bluebeam in general. You open a PDF, you mark it up, you store it on the server. Somebody else opens up the same PDF on the server, they mark it up as well, and we get to approve and introduce and update all the statuses and the changes throughout the lifespan of that PDF representation before the next phase of deliverables to our client. You know, we may have a 30% PDF that got marked up, we make all the changes, we submit a 60% PDF. And then we go through another round of markups for that. So obviously that's one of the larger selling points of Bluebeam. And we have those same options inside of Bluebeam Studio, but we also have this running record of actions inside the session. So that's just a really quick intro to what we expect to see inside the studio session, the documents that have been uploaded, the record of activity inside of there. And if you're no longer participating in that studio session, then we can just leave the session. Note that there's a setting right here, session settings, that is currently not highlighted in this old session demo because it has expired. Nobody can edit this any longer. I'm not the owner of it, so I can't modify or reopen this studio session. I'm just a participant. So I'm going to leave the session. I'm out of it now, but I'm still inside of Bluebeam Studio. I'm still logged in. I can still participate in other sessions, and I'm going to join one, or actually I'm going to add one and ask those following along to please join. So I'm going to click and create a new session. When I create the new session and we see the session code down here, I'm going to ask you to not create a new session, but you're going to click the plus sign and join a session. So I'm going to create a new session. Give me just a moment to talk through what we do when we create a session, and then you'll be able to join it. So I'm going to call this my ESD example session. I'm going to, I don't have any files open, but if I did have some PDFs open inside of Bluebeam, I would have the option of adding those files to the session that I'm creating. Because I don't have any, I'm going to click the add button, and I'm going to, yeah, I got a good expanded data set here. That's actually a 3D file that I want to use. And there was a practice file from what Michael did last week. So I'm just adding a few files to this session. What files are uploaded to a session are the only files that the participants have the ability to access. The owner of the session can allow other people to add documents, but I'm going to leave that restricted. I'm going to say the documents that are loaded are the only documents that are available for markup. That's the only thing that people have the ability to access while working in this session. But I could change the options to allow other folks who are a part of the session and join it to add additional documents. Maybe I missed a file. Well, as the owner of this session, I can always upload additional files. I can always change the permissions. But this is something for the other participants, not the owner. Now, I can also restrict attendees by email address. If I restrict by email address, only those who I've invited, those who I know their email address, can join this session. I'm going to leave that unchecked for this opportunity because I don't know all of your email addresses. I want those who want to follow along and participate to be able to join the session live while we're working through this training. So I'm going to leave that unchecked, but I'm going to say, hey, by the end of the day tomorrow, if you haven't completed your markups, guess what? It's too late. We're closing the markup session, and whatever's done is done. That's what we're working on for the next phase of development before we submit a new release of the document. So I'll say tomorrow by end of business, you have to have your markups done by then. That way, you don't have to be live with the client while going through this. You don't have to be live with the contractor while going through this. You can say by end of next week, have your markups in. We're going to close it out at that point. The session will expire, and we're going to make progress based on the markups that we have at that juncture in time. If and when that becomes an issue, if you did set an expiration, the owner of the session can always reopen it. So we have the flexibility. This is just giving somebody a deadline. And we know as well as anybody else, setting a deadline induces activity. If people know that there's a finish line and they have to cross the finish line in time, then they're more likely to actually get their markups in by that point. And they're also going to get emails. If you set an expiration within 3 days of the expiration of this session, they're going to get an email each day saying, hey, have your markups in by 5 p.m. April 16th, or the session's going to close and your opportunity to create those markups is done. And that's an automated aspect of our notifications. It's a default. We can change those defaults, but that's a default for every participant to receive those notification emails. So I'll say, okay. And that session is going to get created. And here's that session code right up here at the top. Now, whenever you, I can add additional people. I can invite additional people. I can invite people by groups. I have an ATG group that I've been slowly building out. None of those are invited currently to this session. You could have an ESD work group or a client where you have several emails for a client that you specifically work with and build out a group for them as well. and we can include those emails as an address. And once we've populated that, we can invite those participants. If you don't know their emails offhand, well, guess what? We can access our Outlook email list that jumps right into our Outlook contact list, and I can start to grab people there and add them to my emails to invite directly through Bluebeam instead of having to reference both softwares back and forth. I'm going to cancel out of this because I don't need that. Thank you for those who are already joining. We've got a few folks who have jumped in. We've got a few files here. And if you want to, it's okay. I'm okay with you opening up the files and starting to tinker around with the different markups. I may ask folks to do very specific things throughout the training for us to explore those things. I see folks opening up files, and note that those processes, those operations are being logged as everybody joins, as everybody starts to mark up items. We're going to see that information logged as part of our overall record. That's taking our individual markups and kind of putting them on steroids. I did get a question about having a co-owner of the session, and I don't believe that's possible. I believe that whoever creates the session is the administrator of it in perpetuity. We can always download a report and download all the records from a session, and somebody else is reestablish it. I think the one possibility of that is the unfortunate circumstance that somebody became ill and is out for a couple weeks, or leaves the organization and they were the administrator of that. You can still download a report, capture all the markups that took place as part of the session, and create a new session. The markup list is still going to be retained. The records are still going to be retained. So it would require a new session to be created with a new administrator, but I don't believe that you can have multiple owners. Now, we can set the permissions to where effectively everybody else has administrative level permissions, but they would never be the ultimate owner of that information. So we've got a few documents here. I know we've got people looking at a variety of those things and maybe even tinkering around with a couple markups. Yeah, we've got some moved images, some very basic stuff, and that's okay. Feel free to make some markups. I don't mind the markup list expanding a little bit while we go through this. I did see a question about when I arrow over a name in the record window, it only shows the detail box for about 1 second. Can I make that longer? I think if you just keep your mouse completely still, you're going to see that detail for a little bit longer. I'm literally letting go of my mouse to make sure there's not even the slightest change to what I'm touching on my mouse when hovering over those.
Yeah, I try that too, and it doesn't work. And it's always been an issue. And every time I put my arrow on a name, it pops up for about half a second and it's gone. I'm like, oh, what time was he there? I can't tell. It's always been an issue of mine. I don't know.
No, it's a great question. I don't know necessarily what would cause that. It may be something within the profile settings and the individual preferences. I would tinker around in there, maybe somewhere within the interface. It's a little bit different for me. I don't know exactly where to find that setting, but it might be a setting that controls that. I don't think it's a Windows thing. It's probably a Bluebeam thing where you're experiencing that, but I don't know exactly what preference that would be within those settings. But that's where I would look, is under the review preferences dialog. There's probably somewhere in there that you can edit that. And it's possible that it's being pulled in as part of your profile. Preferences can be pre-configured within the profile as well. Again, not familiar enough with your profile to know if that's particularly the case. Okay, so now that I'm the owner of this session, we did have the question about co-owners, and we can't have a co-owner, but excuse me, frog in my throat. I can go to the session settings, and I can change any of those things that I configured before. I can change the expiration. I can enable or de-enable the expiration aspect. I can see the total number of users and files that are included. The attendees, I'm not going to have an attendees list. I know we see an attendees record of who's currently joined, but I didn't invite any of you. So I'm not going to have a log of who's a part of this list. And because I didn't explicitly invite anybody, I also don't have a record of who hasn't joined yet. When you use an email record and you invite people by email, you're going to see if they've ever joined your session or not. And actually, that's going to be indicated by your not joined icon over here within the attendees list. So if somebody says, hey, I've looked, I participated, I've checked it out, yeah, nothing needs marked up, but you see that they've never joined the session, you know they're completely full of it. That they're just telling you that they looked at it and they never have because they never joined the session. I'm not saying you want to slap people's hands for those kinds of things, but it's part of the data fidelity. It's part of the integrity of using Studio and what we do within here. But again, we can invite individual people via their email address. We can invite groups of individuals. Slightly different interface than when we initially created the session. This is the session settings after the session's been created. We can alter the permissions. All attendees or groups of attendees can be given different permissions within it. Again, I chose not to allow anybody to add additional documents. I can give another attendee full control. So again, I'm still going to be the owner. I'm still going to be the host of the session. But if I left the company and as long as I assign somebody else full control, they have the ability to pull the reports. They have the ability to create the record documents and things of that nature as a basis of this. Excuse me. So as long as one other person has this full control aspect, then you're effectively co-owners. It's just that obviously that other individual is not determined as an owner from the terminology standpoint of Bluebeam. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and cancel out of there and not apply any of those changes. And we'll look at some of the changes that may have been made. Add a rectangle. Note whenever I click on somebody's markup or somebody's activity, that it doesn't just allow me to get those details, but it'll take me right to the markup. Okay, so we've got the 3D model there. I'm going to go ahead and close out of that. That's going to be the one file that I try to stay out of until I'm ready to go into it. Because whenever we've got a 3D PDF, it can sometimes bog down our display drivers and things of that nature. I don't want to get into a slowdown while we're on the session today. That will tend to be the only PDF that I have open at a time if it's a 3D PDF, and we'll talk more about that later. But we can jump directly to that markup. We don't have to open up the markups list. We don't have to figure out which PDF we should be looking at. Hey, if somebody added an architect, boom, I can go to that file. I know which file it is because it opened it right up. I can go to the markups list and I can find, oh, hey, there's the markup. I can actually right click and set the status to whether I accepted or rejected or completed that task. You know, if we needed to add the architect to, maybe it was a title block piece of information that needed to be included as the person working on the project, maybe I added that architect, or maybe it was a note to the architect. And if I address that issue, I could right click and set the status to complete. If I was the project manager and we had a phased approach to this to where anybody could make suggestions, anybody could make markups, but it required the project manager's seal of approval, basically, to say, yes, we are accepting these changes. I could come through as the project manager and either right click and set status or double click. Either one works. And I can say that, yes, this markup is accepted. Whoever's working on this project has my approval to actually work through to a level of completion. Now, because somebody else authored this markup, yes, I can select it. Yes, I can change the status, but I'm not the owner of the markup. I'm the owner of the session, but no, I'm trying to drag this markup. I'm trying to edit it. I don't have the ability to. That's another part of the data fidelity and the integrity of these markups. Whoever created the markup owns it. If a client says, oh, I didn't mark that up, I don't know why you made that change. Well, guess what? It logged it. It showed that they were the author of it. We can't change it. We can't artificially replace their name with it. We can't say, we can't fake it, essentially. They have to own the fact that they made that markup, or whoever made it. They are responsible for it. With that same thing in mind, We've got the markup tools that each individual uses. Our client or our contractor may not have the same tools that we have, but as part of the ESD team or the profiles that we have loaded, we have our tool chests. And whatever you have stored in My Tools, or maybe you have a custom ESD tools panel within your tool chest, those are available to you in sessions, just like they are in regular old Bluebeam. Now, will the other people, the clients and the contractors, have access to those markup tools? No, they'll have access to their own My Tools or their own personalized tool chest. The nice thing is if a recent tool is used, it's saved. But note that other folks are using tools and markups within this document. It's going to be loaded as a recent tool for them. It is not loaded as a recent tool for me. So your recent tools are your recent tools. Not only do you own the markup, but Bluebeam recognizes that it is your markup and it's your recent tool used. I wouldn't have any recent tools used until I placed one, and then it becomes my recent tool, and nobody else should see that in their own recent tools list. And because I created that markup, I have the ability to delete it. And because I deleted it, it's gone, it's out of the markup list. So you have, as the author of a markup, you have the ability to delete that markup, but you're the owner of it. Nobody else can manipulate it. Nobody else can delete it. Once the markup is deleted, it is gone. Nobody else can change or accept or modify the status. It's gone from the markup list. That said, once the session closes, nobody but the owner has the ability to pull a report, or the administrator, whoever has administrative access. Nobody else has the ability to make those changes. So once the session's closed, you can't go back and artificially delete your markup because you want to tell somebody, oh, I didn't mark that up. No, it's there. It's part of the session, it's saved. So if the markups were closed out at the end of the day, they're frozen in time effectively. The only person who owns that document now is whoever created the session or that they gave administrative privileges to. And then, and again, even though they're the owner of the session and and have administrative rights, even still, they don't have the ability to modify these markups. There is one singular exception to that. I'm going to close my tool chest. I know you have an ESD shared tool chest as part of your profile. Fantastic. Thanks for bringing that up, Samir. But back in the studio session, let's say a disgruntled employee leaves or is let go, or somebody at a client's, their disgruntled employee is gone. You can, as the owner of a session, you can deny or remove that individual. If that individual owns any markups, then, and I'm not going to remove anybody in here, but if I did deny somebody the ability to access and they owned markups, as the owner and the host of the session, Bluebeam is going to prompt me to reassign their markups to somebody else. So I tell you that from an administrative standpoint of data integrity standpoint, but I also ask that you don't game the system and use that to falsify who has created those markups at any point in time. That would be an overuse of your power or abuse of power as the owner of the session to reassign things willy-nilly without other people who are still involved with the project knowing. So we do have some administrative privileges along those lines. If other folks are in the markup, we're in a Zoom session. Not everybody has Zoom. Not everybody wants to use Zoom. Not everybody wants to be live working within things. I can use the chat window and say, Tyler, please explain markup to move. And it's going to be a part of the chat session, and that's taking an unusually long time for it to load. That's usually extremely quick. Maybe it is just because I'm streaming on Zoom, but under normal circumstances, and it should show up here shortly, I'm going to get that mark. Oh, it's because I'm filtered. That's why. I'm going to jump to my filtering and include chat. So we can chat to folks and we can see, talk with each other while we're going through it. Or again, Maybe we're not on Zoom because we don't have the same time slot available to complete these markups. The benefit of Studio is we don't all have to be in the same room at the same time. We can give everybody involved in the project a window of opportunity. Maybe it's a day, maybe it's a few days, maybe it's a week, to create their markups, and not just create the markup, but maybe make a note in the chat session why their markup was created and what it represented. We can obviously go through and we can add a markup to their markup. I can't change this markup, but I could go to tools and I could create a call out and I could say, hey, please explain. And that's my markup to their markup. And maybe you have some standards around the process or the workflow for that. But we can create communication using this method or through the method down here with the chat window. Now, again, we've got several abilities there with regard to these changes. I am going to kind of take this a step further. We've got multiple documents loaded into this file. We've got multiple people making markups. I think most people are probably in the floor building template. I'm going to jump over here and assume that nobody's made markups, or if there are, they're minimal at this point. And please keep it that way for a moment. With both of these floor
Hey, Brian.
plans. Yes, sir.
One question about those, the chat and those internal markups. Like I could see us using this for internal collaboration and asking questions, chatting, but then wanting to send a cleaner finished version to a client. What's the best way to do that?
That's great. That's a great question. I was going to get to exporting a report later, but this really is a good opportunity based on your question to cover that. As the owner or administrator of a session, I can at any point in time create a report. Now the session is going to be open as long as the session is set to open or set to expire. But at any point in time while the session's live or after it's been expired, a report summary or a record summary can be created. We can actually create an entire PDF package, summary, or combined files. A slightly different functionality between there. PDF package is going to basically export all the files with their included markups in kind of an interesting PDF format. I'm just going to do it really, really quick so we can see that. I'm going to save it here, and you're going to see this is actually a PDF. This data that we're seeing right here on the page is embedded within the PDF, opened in Bluebeam. I can go to the documents folder and see the files, including all the markups that were a part of that documents folder. I can go back to home and I can look at the report and double click on that. And here's the report of all the comments, all the moves, all the other things. I can even, and actually I didn't append it. I didn't choose that option, but normally I could have hyperlinked these markups to where it would actually take me to those changes and those markups in each individual drawing too. But I didn't choose that option in the previous dialogue. But one of the options that we have when creating the report, whether we've got it filtered here within what we're viewing in the record, or while creating the report, I choose to remove, let's see here, include filtered items only. And actually that's a little bit more clarity. I should have filtered the chat out. I could go in here and say, only include the filtered items. Now, whenever I create the packaged report, and I'll just overwrite the previous one, that's on my local drive or that gets saved to your server. And now the report's not going to include any of the chat information. So we have the ability to clean things up. We cannot individually delete records, but if we know that maybe there was some kind of offhand conversation or internal conversation that we don't want the client to be privy to, maybe it was completely professional, but it was just internal communication that wasn't for the purposes of a client viewing or a contractor viewing or potentially a competitor. Sometimes we're asked to collaborate by clients with our competitors on a shared project. There may be some intellectual property or some detailed information that we just don't want our competitor to be privy to our internal workflows on. So we have the ability to filter out that information as part of the report that's created. And then not only do, and I'll do that one last time, but using one of the other settings, we can just use the record summary individually. That's just that record report that we saw before, or we can use the combined files, and I'll save that, override again, just for the sake of training. And here's that filtered information, just page one. And we can see there's the hyperlink because of the option I chose that time. It'll take me directly to that document or that part of the document. I could go back to page 1 and click a different link, and it's going to take me to that particular file and where that markup is. It may have been a fairly large markup to where it's not zooming in specifically to where that markup took place. But nevertheless, we have that hyperlink functionality. If the 100-page set, this becomes extremely helpful for finding where those markups took place. But once we've got the file open, we can see that list of markups embedded in the PDF still, and we can still, accept, deny, complete our statuses for those markups. But great question, Tyler. Thanks for that. Definitely one of the more critical aspects of using this tool is creating a report after the fact, because what actually does happen, and I've got a separate, I'm going to create a new tab because I think I've got this information saved. Yeah, this is critical to know for anybody who's creating a session or hosting a session, is that a finished session will have all the files removed after 120 days. This is cloud hosted, but it's assumed because it's I know Bluebeam is a paid for product, and we're using maybe even a maintenance license of it that it's getting continuously updated. But as you can imagine, there are massive petabytes of data that are being served onto this cloud by all users across the United States and North America of Bluebeam. So after 120 days of a session being finished, the files in the session will be completely removed from Bluebeam servers. An inactive session, meaning that you never set an expiration. It does have a little bit longer before the files are deleted. Bluebeam's just giving you the benefit of the doubt that maybe it's still an active project, but nobody's edited it in a while. So an expired session and a finished session versus an inactive one, the files will eventually get removed from there. So that's an important aspect to know, that we do need to pull a report and export those files to, again, either our server location or our local drive that we're hosting these PDFs at the end of a session. And again, everybody's markups are embedded in there. They're the owner of those markups. And we have the ability to potentially re-upload those PDFs or those packages back up to a new session to kind of start back over. I know plenty of projects that have been shelved for 6 months or a couple years and come back. So pulling a report at the end of a session, saving those files off, having them available for whenever a project kicks back off, when funding's available a couple years later, we have that ability to create a new session from that.
Brian, I have to add that because I just recently as well received an email of sessions that is about to expire as well. So, once you log in, it reactivates it.
Samir, I'm not quite sure I caught that. I turned my volume up as much as I could, but I don't think I heard everything that you said.
Okay, I'll put it in chat.
Okay, thank you. I'll check it out in the chat. Thanks. Now, I mentioned before the expiration and creating a report. While we're on this topic, I can leave this session at any point in time. That does not close it. Everybody who's a part of this session, who's already joined or who wants to join, can still get into it at any point in time. I'm just out of it currently. I'm not currently editing it. I'm out of it. I can jump into another session. Everybody else still has access to it. But I'm going to jump back in, and I have the ability to drop down and finish the session. As soon as I finish the session, whether I did that manually or I set the expiration within the session notes, thanks for clarifying what you were saying before, Samir. Bluebeam will inform the user of sessions about to expire. Yes, those notifications are important. They default to and remind the users that session is about to expire. And I believe those default to 3 days before the end of the session, and they'll get an email update every day for those 3 days whenever the session's about to expire. We'll talk just a little bit more about those notifications, but that is the default. So I can close and finish the session at any point in time. As the owner, even if I said, hey, you got till next Friday, I could override that expiration date and finish it right now. I'm not saying that that's good practice or good ethics necessarily, but maybe something got screwed up. Maybe somebody was added to the session that shouldn't have been. or maybe somebody owns some information in here that really should never have been involved. We have that capacity to finish the session and then just restart it. Some things we just have to make the tough decision to administrate in a way that we wouldn't normally want to, but we absolutely have to. So we can finish a session at any point in time. But this method, when we finish a session, that's what starts the clock on the 120 days before the files and the session is completely removed from Bluebeam's server and is gone forever. But I can leave a session at any point in time and come back into it. Anybody else who's a participant can leave a session at any time and come back into it. Now, if I did not invite you by email and you only know the session code, please make sure that you keep that handy, because while it may be a part of your session list currently, you never know when something's going to happen. If you get out of Bluebeam, you come back in, you have to reinstall, you get a new computer. If you were not invited by email, make a list, keep a record of what those session codes are. It's going to remember the sessions that you've been in recently, but still cover your butt is essentially what I'm saying. Make sure that you have the ability to join that session again. But best practice would be, outside of this kind of a training environment, that you are invited by email or you invite others via email, okay? At any point in time, again, as the owner, I can change those permissions and the ownership, or sorry, not the ownership, but the permissions and the administrative rights and who I want to additionally invite via email, and et cetera. So notifications was another area. I got an alert from, I believe that was from Samir. Yeah, that there was a cloud. I can jump to that note based on the markup that was made, and we can embed those notifications inside, so we can alert attendees to markups that have been made. We can select any of our markups, right click, and choose who we want to be alerted to a particular markup. Not just email notifications that a session is ending, but a particular markup that they need to pay attention to, which is a fantastic tool there. But the notifications themselves, I would actually have to get completely out, I believe. Yeah, I don't want to get out of the session again, but I can change what those notifications are, or I could create another session and determine who's going to be notified at what frequency whenever we get out, or whenever a session is approaching its end. Before we get too far ahead, I know you've got your own tool chest, you've got your own tools. The snapshot utility still works inside of sessions. It's going to get added to your recent tools list. You can always add it to your My Tools. It's available inside and outside of a studio session. We can overlay PDFs. That's what I was getting to a little bit earlier. The big difference when working within Studio versus regular Bluebeam outside of a studio session is, when you go to document and you go to compare documents or overlay pages to compare those changes, you don't have to have those files open in regular Bluebeam. And I know we're in Bluebeam, but we're specifically inside a session, and we're specifically talking about files, PDF files that are in and a part of this session. In order to compare documents, either using the overlay tool or the compare side-by-side tool, we need to not only have those documents uploaded as part of our session, but also open currently. So while those documents are open, I've got before and after open. I can go to document and I can compare documents side by side. I can choose which ones of those I want to compare currently. Note that I've got a fourth document as a part of my session, but I don't have it open, so it's not available from this list. So I'm going to compare the before and the after. I'm going to do the split screen view and say, okay. And as I zoom in on one view and look at a markup, it's going to synchronize and zoom me in on the other view. So even though I'm in a session, I can still use these compare tools and synchronize tools between the PDFs inside of Studio. That's sometimes not realized, because most people don't realize, hey, I have to have those documents open. Most of the time, and I'm not going to save those changes, most of the time, the assumption is, oh, well, I want to compare documents, and they don't see it available. And they don't want to open up new files from outside the studio session. They want to work with the files that are in the studio session. Well, they're not available. They're not available from your file menu anymore, because they're a part of the cloud. They've already been uploaded to Studio. So they don't know that the compare documents is a capable option. You just have to have them open. The same thing goes for our overlay pages option. I want to add all my open files, but then remove my bid template because that's irrelevant. So I'm going to remove that. I can change the color coding between the before and the after, and I can say, okay. And again, it only was able to do this because I had both PDFs that were a part of the session open currently when I went to the overlay options, and I can see those changes that have been made. Because this is a new file, this overlay is a merged file between those two. This file, this overlay, is not actually a part of my session until or unless I save this file and upload it as the owner or an administrator with the privileges to add a file. This is not going to be a part of the session. This is going to be saved locally. And because it's a new document, none of you have access to it right now, and there are no markups within this file. All right. So one of the few things that I know we wanted to cover today, we got to notifications, we talked about exporting the reports, we talked about filtering the report information, which I think is really, really critical, that those kind of side conversations or just internal dialogue can be filtered out of the report that's created. I think we've covered like 99% of the information that we wanted to today, but a couple things that I really wanted to still detail is changing markups. So I'm going to go back to our flooring bid template. This file is already a part of our studio session. And I believe you have a workflow for changing the status and changing the color coding of markups once their status has been changed. There are two methods for working within that. We can just use the filter options, and we can change the filter options to create a new one. Actually, this one's saved because I used it on my system in a previous training. So the only thing that was marked complete is the only thing that's highlighted in blue or whatever its original color was, and everything else is grayed out. Why is that an option? Because I created this filter in a previous session. You may not see this right now because you did not create this filter before getting into Studio. So I'm gonna actually, I'm not going to delete that. I'm just going to get out and clear my filter. But note that I can't create new filters right now. You can't do that within the studio session. I even creating new statuses or setting status properties. I don't have a manage option within my list for this. We have the ability to create those filters. We have the ability to change the style of our status options, but we just can't do it inside of Studio. The reason being is because, yes, you have a paid version of Studio, but not everybody who's at, or a paid version of Bluebeam, but not everybody who's using your Studio session necessarily has a paid version of Bluebeam. Those people who have used an expired 30-day trial and are using just the free viewer, Bluebeam unfortunately does limit a couple features inside of Studio because those are advanced high-level features that they don't want people to exploit through a free version of the software. So unfortunately it affects all of us, but it protects them, their intellectual property, and their pricing structure of the software as well. So what I'll do temporarily is I'll just open up a duplicate version of this bid template. And I know not everybody's marked this up and it's not a part of the session, but what I can do before I ever bring it into the session is I can go through and I can manage the status. I can say if something's been completed, it's going to be, yeah, I'm going to apply a color and it's going to be green. Anything that's been completed, and I can apply, some other modifiers or descriptors to that. Anything that's been accepted and needs to be addressed, then that's going to be yellow. Anything that has been rejected, I can set it to a color status of red. So I can add those filters into here. And as I make the changes, and note that I'm not in Studio right now, I accept that. If I go to one of these flooring markups, let's see, there we go, and I change it from my status to completed, we can see that the markup changes. That's great. That's what we expect in normal Bluebeam, right? I'm going to undo that. I'm going to add this file to our Bluebeam session. Let me minimize the markups. I'm going to do a quick save as because I don't want to, actually, I'll just save over it. It's fine. I've got a duplicate version of this project set. And I'm going to upload and add a new file, floor bid template. I may change the name of it really quick. I'm going to close out of it here just because I want to make sure that we can keep it separate. And I don't want us to get confused over which one is which inside the Bluebeam session. But I'll go ahead and open that. Give it a second. It should have been much quicker. Come on. There it is. Okay. So there's our version of the file inside the session. Everybody else should be able to access this now. Because it's a part of the session, may take just a second for it to kind of stream and make it available to everybody else. But now that I'm in the session, if I set this to complete, don't make a liar out of me. It's going to make a liar out of me. We should have had that session and that markup update. Oh, there it goes. Okay. There we go. It just took a second for it to apply. It scared me there for a second. And it's gonna be somewhat dependent. I was just looking at the wrong area. That's what my problem was. I was looking at a different markup. I was looking for the one that was set up there. So as the statuses change and it becomes completed, now we're going to see the most recent status reflected in the color coding of that markup. There we go. I was inadvertently changing over here. The one limitation, and the reason why it didn't stand out to me whenever I changed the area measurement here to completed or even canceled for that matter, is hatches. Hatches do not update with status color coding. So keep that in mind. That is one limitation of our status changes, is a hatch pattern as defined inside of Bluebeam does not update. Now, an overall hatched area, solid, yes, but a hatch pattern does not. And then kind of lastly, before we just open it up for general conversations and questions, and I know we're at the top of the hour, so I apologize if we've gone on just a little bit long, but I encouraged questions throughout. I'm going to go ahead and close out of the subsequent files because I am going to get into that 3D PDF. And this would traditionally be something that was created inside of Revit or a similar software that can produce a 3D PDF. We can change the view mode and the view style of this 3D PDF. We can change the markup. We can change the actual, there's some saved display states, but we can change whether we're seeing it in a wireframe or whether we're seeing it in a cross-section view. So I can set a cross-section view, or I can move that cross-section view as well. We have the ability to make those adjustments, but what's really critical, really, let me move that back, is whatever information was coded into the 3D Revit file or wherever it came from, the object data. If we go to the 3D cube that's down by our markups list, we can actually see all the structured data that's inside that 3D PDF. And if we select that data object, we're actually going to get it highlighted and shown in here. That was just a wall panel that really didn't have much data assigned to it. Precast stair, we can see that information. If we needed to have some custom columns added to the PDF, we could do that before we ever upload it as part of Bluebeam, and we can add those additional details. Maybe it's a cost structure, maybe it's a timeline, but we have the ability to filter down data as part of our 3D PDF and change our cross-sectional views and things of that nature. Again, what functionality does this provide to you? It depends on what your use case scenario is and the kind of client that you're collaborating with. BIM 360 or the Autodesk collaboration cloud, whatever they're calling it these days, does take on some of this load. If we're using Revit, if we have Revit spaces that we've got uploaded to BIM 360 and we're collaborating that way, then go ahead and collaborate that way. But if we have a client that doesn't want to use that platform, that you've got, that you've done a lot of work with, that is already familiar with review and with studio sessions, this is a perfectly applicable way to allow markups and to allow kind of exploration and discovery of the details inside of 3D PDF and the structured data from that model as well. Okay. I think I've covered everything that we needed to cover today. We're a few minutes over, but I'd like to invite anybody with questions over the next few minutes to go ahead and pipe up and ask them now. Use the chat, unmute yourself and ask it. And if you want to stump me, try to stump me, that's fine. If I don't have an answer for you, I can always get back in touch with you at a later date and follow up with an answer to those questions. But fire away. And if we don't hear anything after a couple minutes, then we'll go ahead and depart.
Can you show again how you exported that record session?
Yeah, absolutely. So as the owner of the session or administrator, if we have either of those privileges, we should at any point in time be able to export a report. As I was,
you have to be the
owner,
administrator.
Yeah. So that's one thing that you're
that's why I
probably
couldn't
not
find it.
seeing. Yeah. So I've got an icon there that probably nobody else has right now, but I can again either do the record summary itself. That's just the report of the log within the record. I can do combined files that's going to create one single standard or what you would think of as a typical PDF with maybe 5 or 6 or 7 pages to it in this case. That has the record report plus whatever individual PDF files are in here. And these don't have to be individual single sheet PDFs. Any of these PDFs that are uploaded to here could be a 80 sheet set, and we can still mark it up and combine those files into the report. Or the PDF package report is really the all of the above example to where we have that structured data. We can go to the report, or we can just go to the individual documents and view the markups there as well. Great question again, though. But that is a limitation of having those administrative privileges. All right, I'm going to leave the session really quick. And if I don't have any other questions, thanks for the compliment via chat. And I'll go ahead and say thank you for your time. I appreciate your participation. Your questions always make this a more lively presentation. It keeps me on my toes, obviously, but it allows us to get a little bit more in depth on what we're covering, maybe more so than I would have without any prompting or without the question. So I think everybody gains more out of that, and I appreciate that level of participation from you. So thanks again for your time. Again, this is a recorded session. I'm going to make this available to your leadership that coordinated these training sessions, and maybe it's even William who sends that your way, but either way, the recording will be available, and I invite anybody to reach out in the future to either William or myself with any questions, concerns, or opportunities that you see for additional training. William, did you have anything to add before we close for the day? Probably prompting you off.
I think you covered everything. That's good for me. Yeah.
Okay.
If you guys do have any other questions, feel free to reach out to us. We'll get you whatever information you guys need. Thanks again for coming. I really appreciate everybody's time.
All right. Take care, everybody, and thanks again. Bye.
Thank you.
You're welcome.